Hey everyone, I'm Henry Kaiser, and welcome to 5 Hats, where I bring you into my process developing a video game as a producer, designer, engineer, artist, and journalist. Now, journalists spend hours a day doing interviews, reading context, and writing the stories audiences use to get to the bottom of what's happening in their world. But I'm not making a simulator or detective game, I'm making an action game. And you've got only 5 minutes to do a bunch of interviews while dodging dangers before you write an article and try to get to the bottom of what's happening in my world. So how do I write a game about writing stories that players don't have time to read? As a journalism game, I want you to drop into a uniquely unfolding story for each assignment and to collect the quotes and photos needed to craft a good article under tight time pressure. As an action game, I don't want to be stopping the activity and the ticking clock for long blocks of dialogue, regardless of whether that's reading or voice acted. So our problem boils down to how do we deliver a bunch of story for you to collect so you can write that story within hurried gameplay constraints. Now, first, we need to remember that even as a journalist in my game, the player story and the assignment story are two different things. The player story is constructed in the overarching narrative and choices. As a procedurally generated game, this is where most of the actual narrative design effort is spent, ensuring each playthrough provides meaningful progression and outcomes from the choices of the player's fantasy journalism career, exposing different opportunities to interface with the inciting actions and underlying plots. Writing generative arcs out of interchangeable beats has challenges, but the structure can be learned by studying games like XCOM, Into the Breach, and even Dungeons & Dragons.
What is that again?
Our problem today isn't the player story, but the assignment's story, which I keep putting in air quotes because it's really just a novel crafting system. Everyday professional journalists collect and assemble stories with the same thoughtfulness, skill, and process that culinary chefs can wield to improvise ingredients into special dishes. However, when you're playing a chef in a video game, you don't question how the character cuts ingredients so masterfully or adds the perfect amount of salt. All you need to do as the player is understand what's available so you can assemble what the game telegraphs as a great possible combination of ingredients for the ask at hand. Besides adding a headline for flavor, my journalism player is never asked to type anything with a keyboard. You're not being a writer, you're playing a writer. For any gamified article grading algorithm to reasonably judge if you assembled a good composition of quotes and photos for what you were assigned, it needs to evaluate each story component and synergy of what the player inputs. This isn't an easily solved problem using something like AI, because that means relinquishing any balance or predictability I want the game to have from player to player. Ultimately, mathematical values need to be applied to each ingredient, helping or hurting the scored article, depending on a table of ingredient types versus some ideal recipes. Initially, your character won't know what goes into a good article per assignment. The player can guess using real-world parallels, but the goal isn't to feel like there's a mathematically correct answer, because there's no such thing as a mathematically perfect article. It's better to make the attempts fuzzy and the feedback enjoyable. For my game, after you submit your article, virtual editor and critic feedback expose to you some of the good and bad choices you made for your specific assignment. This is an adaptation of the crafting, grading, and feedback system from Game Dev Tycoon. While the feedback is always accurate to the ideal, your actual score may vary based on some factors like public demand, relationships, and tiny amounts of randomness. Because there's no way to guarantee a perfect score, we don't want players spending their finite time sifting through blocks of text and photos for details and clues. The game needs to quickly communicate the results of each interview and photo and boil down its contents, so a player can instantly understand whether it might work in their article. Within the first minute of getting interviews in a level, players should start to predict and pre-build their article's lead. What subject did what to what person, place, or thing, near where, before, during, or after what event. Plugging those into the UI, the game then helps them inventory what they have or are missing for that article, or flip through different lead combinations to consider a better story for what they do have. To serve this, instead of dealing in sentences and images, they're working with an inventory of collected story items with a slug of each item's stats. For an interview, it's about the question. So the slug contains something like actor, subject, answer, quality. And for photos, it's about what was happening in the image. So something like actor, action, event, quality. As a narrative designer, these slugs need to be written to evoke their value, nouns, and verbs, while the UI shows the synergies between the slugs based on that in-game feedback your characters received critically. A simple, lower quality answer should also use plain wording, and an exciting, high quality story item should use more fantastical language, but still needs to avoid introducing confusion because we don't want players to be slowed down trying to understand it. It's possible that outside the time crunch of that 5-minute adventuring loop, I redesigned these slugs within the player's notebook as something more expounded upon story-wise. But it's equally possible they always stay no more than a crafting ingredient, because not only do snippets of your experiences work as imagination fuel for your brain to fill them with emergent meaning, but slugs are far easier to work with for applying accessibility metadata and localizing into other languages. Now, the art of writing all of this is still very much a work in progress, because my game hasn't even reached a full demo, and as it progresses, it means writing more and more of the clearest, procedurally interchangeable fantasy slugs imaginable. No pressure. If you have thoughts about breaking stories, interview questions, and answers into single-word slugs, share it in the comments below, and if you want to discuss more roles or projects that you're exploring with me, shoot me something over on LinkedIn. That's all for this episode. In the next one, we're going to look at my code for interviewing as a rhythm game. We'll see you then for more 5 Hats. Take care.